And I wanted to sort of show my journey as potentially, a guidepost to help others and really drive home the point that help does exist. There are ways to better deal with anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. I went through a whole lot of false starts. As I chronicle in the book, I saw well over 100 different providers, physical therapists, podiatrists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, you name it, most of whom didn't help me at all until I finally found the people who did.
That's Washington Congressman Adam Smith. And coming up, we're going to be talking to him about his book, Lost and Broken, My Journey Back from Chronic Pain and Crippling Anxiety. An interesting read about his challenges physically, but also mentally. And welcome, everybody, to Chino Y Chicano.
I'm Matt Chan, the Chino.
I'm Enrique Cerna, the Chicano. And Matt, I think the thing that's really most interesting is with Adam Smith is that he's really opened up about this issue of mental health and how he had chronic pain and other issues that have really been a challenge for him for a number of years, and how you do that and still at the same time try to serve in Congress and in politics at all these days, to me is that's got to be a tough deal. And I'm glad he's willing to talk about it.
Well, the fact that he wrote a book about this means he's pretty secure in his career, and because, any other lesser politician would see this as a way to be attacked. But it isn't. I mean, it's real, and he shared it, and a lot of people will benefit from the wisdom he has in the book about his journey.
Yeah, and I think what it really does is also help break down that stigma that there is, particularly about mental health issues. I think we've also seen more and more prominent folks being willing to step up and talk about it. But he makes a really good point in our conversation that it's not just talking about the issue of what you have been dealing with, but how you can get help, which I think is the most important thing, to tell people that, look, get beyond the stigma, but also seek help, because there is help out there. It can be challenging to get it, but I think that, it can be done. And the other thing we're going to be talking to him about is just about Congress.
The state of our democracy.
Which is in a tough state, let's face it, being very much challenged by Donald Trump as he tries to get the presidency again, but by Republicans and others that, you got to wonder, what do they want?
Well, and he explains it pretty well. I mean, and he gives some good examples, because I think a lot of it is the media just fixates on the clown show.
It does.
And so it gives everyone this overloaded sense of anxiety about our democracy. I mean, it's not that we shouldn't be anxious about it, but maybe not as much as we think.
Yeah. We have to balance that, but also understand that our democracy is being threatened right now. One of the things that he faced recently was vandalism at his home by folks who are advocating for a ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Someone came to his home and they spray painted "Free Gaza," I think, on his garage. Again, it brings up that issue of people coming to a person's home.
It's almost become like the Seattle process, right?
Yeah.
I mean, since Sawant uncorked the genie on that, I mean, it's sort of become part of their playbook, which is disgusting. And I think, it discourages good people from running for office.
Yeah, which I think is part of the game plan for some folks. But I think Adam Smith makes it clear that he's not going anywhere, because he's held that position for quite a few years as in the 9th Congressional District. And he's been a very strong voice of reason, I think moderate reason, among the Democrats and others that are in Congress. Here now is our conversation with Washington Congressman Adam Smith. Well, I'll start with how I did when we talked with Marilyn Strickland, which is just like, what the hell is going on back there?
Yeah. Well, let me just say that I don't necessarily agree with the general take that it's, some sort of horrible situation. It's democracy. I mean, that's what it is. And I wish more people would appreciate and respect that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get a nation of roughly 330 million people to get along. and it is an incredibly diverse nation in every meaningful sense of the word, mostly in terms of opinions and beliefs and what people, want and don't want. And that's what democracy has to do. It has to try to figure out a way to peacefully resolve our differences and govern society. And I cannot personally imagine a scenario whereby that just runs smoothly. I always ask people to do a little thought experiment. Imagine that you're with 10 of your friends and you all have to unanimously agree on where you're going to go to lunch. Just have that conversation, much less how you're going to spend $6 trillion, deal with healthcare policy, the border, various wars around the world. So look, I mean, this is how democracy works and functions, and it's because it's inclusive. I always like this Winston Churchill quote where he said, "You can always count on America to do the right thing once they've exhausted all the other options," which is in one sense critical, but also there's because we have to listen to people. It's supposed to be representative democracy. You can't just come in and say, "This is the way we're doing it." You'll say that, and then people, So you have to take all those opinions, listen to them, make sure people feel included, and still make the decisions that are necessary to govern society. So, it's going to be rough. It's going to be difficult.
But we have a handful of bad actors, right? I mean, these people that are more into entertainment than governing. Mm-hmm. They're definitely not reflecting their constituents. I mean, I couldn't imagine that, but how disruptive is that in the process? I mean, it seems to be, even, Representative Strickland said that there is a level of collegiality that it does function. But when you have bad actors in there and the kind of slim margins everyone has, how does that work? I mean, how is that going to have a happy ending of any sort?
Well, I think it's difficult, but it's also, again, reflective of society. In any group you have, I mean, think of your family. I mean, depending on how large your family is and in-laws and all that, or think of where you work, there's always, people who are tougher to get along with than others, for one reason or another. They're disagreeable. They have opinions that are different from others. They push things harder than others do. And Congress is reflective of society in that regard. We passed the defense bill this morning, and a group of Freedom Caucus Republicans opposed it. And Mike Rogers and I argued with them for about an hour this morning about their various viewpoints on that. And they're going to be a challenge. But at the end of the day, we passed the bill. We heard them, we had the vote, and we moved forward. So, now I will say there are aspects of current society that have made it more difficult. And certainly the sort of dawn of the celebrity representative does create a problem because they're, like you said, I guess I'll quote the Oregon head coach in his pregame speech against Colorado. They're playing for clicks. We got a lot of people in Congress who are doing that. In fact, we had one member, Nancy Mace, who according to her staff, according to her memo, said she's going to vote in the way that gets her on TV the most. Okay. And there's definitely people who do that. And that makes it more difficult without question. But I think that's true in larger society, too. You always around people who will do the outrageous thing because they just want attention. I mean, that's part of dealing with the sort of the human psyche, if you will.
Right. Well, democracy is messy. There's no doubt about that. I wanted to get your reaction to the House vote yesterday that fell on party lines yesterday as we are recording right now, having to do with opening an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Just politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad, very, very sad development because the Republicans have made it clear that they are impeaching Joe Biden out of vengeance, period. That because we impeached Donald Trump for trying to overthrow the government, seemed kind of important, they have to get even. And Donald Trump has said that. If they do it to me, I do it. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is leading them on that. And it's really rather remarkable. They've started the inquiry without any evidence. I mean, there was this incredible hearing where the Republicans in the Government Oversight Committee did a hearing. They brought their own witnesses, said, we do not have evidence of wrongdoing by the president. So what they've said is, we're going to go look and see if we can find something. I mean, they don't have any evidence. but that's not going to stop them from moving forward. And I believe that is an abuse of the process in the House that undermines our ability to do our work.
Yeah, it's a waste of time and money and all of those things. So I don't know, that's what makes it, I guess, this where some people look at it as a clown show, because, you know, you're going off on something that it's just a waste of time, really, more than anything else.
Well, and right now, the country is in a point where the world is very dangerous right now. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we're fooling around with this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask you was about the Ukraine, and why all of a sudden are the Republicans pro-Russia? You've been around the defense world forever, and I'm just thinking, how did that happen?
Yeah.
There's two reasons for that. Reason number one is because Donald Trump has decided that he's against Ukraine. And so a lot of Republicans feel like they do not want to alienate Trump's supporters, so they are agreeing with him on that. Now, why Trump made that decision is a really weird thing. And I mean, way back when, the first time Trump got impeached, it was because he asked President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government to dig up dirt on Joe Biden, and they said no. So maybe Trump and his loyalty test is like, you weren't with me, so to hell with you. But there's actually something more that's really problematic, and that is the rise of sort of white Christian nationalism and authoritarian government. And you see people like Senator Josh Hawley, who are sort of unabashed white Christian nationalists, and they see in Vladimir Putin a kindred spirit. He aspires to be exactly that. So they are more sympathetic to that. You see this in the government of Hungary. Actually, about a year ago, there was an article in the New Yorker entitled "Make America Hungry Again," and it analyzed Hungary, the country, not the. So it analyzed how the far right in the U.S. had glommed on to President Orban, as an example of how to move this white Christian nationalist approach to politics into place. So there are a number of Republicans, as Chino memorably put it, who are in the pro-Putin caucus. They like that sort of strong man government. So there is sympathies there. So those are the two reasons that we're getting the pushback that we are from Republicans on supporting Ukraine.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about what happened at your home recently. The pro-Palestinian supporters came to your home and did a spray paint job, I guess, on your garage. I don't know if they did.
They vandalized my house.
Yeah, they vandalized your house. First of all, were you home when this happened, or
I was not. I was in D.C. My wife was home. She was the only one home. My children are, one of them's an adult now and living and working in D.C., and the other one's in college at Washington State.
Yeah, go Cougs.
So I met
him. I met him.
So, my wife was home. They came in the middle of the night and did it, and she just saw it when she got up in the morning. And look, it is part of a very disturbing trend in American politics, and that is on the extreme left and the extreme right, the effort to intimidate elected officials. And we've seen this for at least the last 5 or 6, longer than that. I mean, I remember regularly activists used to show up and shout down Dow Constantine over the youth detention facility, but they just wouldn't let him talk, no matter the subject, no matter where he was. They did the same thing to a succession of mayors in the city of Seattle as well. And then, of course, in 2020, we had these left-wing activists show up at people's homes, Police Chief Carmen Best and the mayor and city council people, and attempt to intimidate them into taking positions at their house, which in some cases they succeeded. But that's what this is. It is an effort to subvert democracy and intimidate people. And it undermines a representative government because a lot of people won't run for office if they know their homes are going to be at risk, their homes and their families. Now, I'm in this. I'm not going anywhere for a variety of different reasons, but it is a deeply troubling trend on both the far left and the far right, where threats, intimidation, and in some cases, violence are considered to be an acceptable means of advancing your cause.
Well, I mean, do you think this is part of democracy, or because
No.
how do you curb this? How do you alter this behavior? I mean, without like coming down with some force.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a number of different steps here. First of all, recognize that people have a right to express themselves. And that's why in my statement, I made it very clear. I meet with the left-wing activist groups. I meet with the pro-Palestinian groups. I'll meet with anybody. I don't, I'll go on whatever show they want me to go on, have that conversation because it's my job. So yes, people have a right to express themselves. They have a right to protest. In fact, a number of people have protested, offices, one time or another. My office has been protested a couple of times, and others, okay, that's fine. But when you're going to the private residence of an elected official, you are doing something more than giving your democratic free speech. You are attempting to intimidate that person. As I was on a show with John Carlson yesterday, and he said, what they're really saying is, I know where you live.
Yeah.
And that's a threat. And threats and intimidation and violence are not part of civil dialogue and representative democracy.
So how do you handle it? How I know that you're speaking out about it as you are right now, but with your family in that, I mean, that goes to a whole different level.
Yeah, I handle it by not being intimidated. And look, these are difficult times, and I think it's more important than ever that we have elected officials who are willing to fully embrace representative democracy and try to be practical problem solvers, to apply common sense when there are so many extremist dogmatic ideologies trying to jam their views down the throats of everybody else. I think that I am an important counterbalance to that. And it is my obligation to stay in there. And my family feels the same way. I mean, to some degree, I'm lucky. I've been doing this my whole life. I got elected to the state Senate when I was 25. I met my wife a year after that. My kids grew up with it. They weren't born until after I was elected to Congress. And my family is very supportive of what I do and for the reasons that I do it. So we will not be intimidated on that front.
Yeah. There seems to be right now, as you have experienced, just this overall divisiveness in the country. And we're seeing it now, especially with the Israel-Hamas conflict. And either, you take the position of being pro-Israel or you don't. You take the people that are wanting others to speak out about the Palestinian situation, and if you aren't with them, then you're not. It's this kind of headbutting that goes on. It just seems right now this is just kind of a big mess, and nobody.
Right. There's two ways to look at it. One, you can say that we are substantively as divided as we've been at any time since the Civil War. That's sort of one interpretation of the current set of events. Just do another little thought experiment. Watch Fox News for 24 hours and then watch MSNBC for 24 hours, and you'll think you're living on two separate planets.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? On a wide range of issues, there's just an entirely different way of looking at things. And so the question is that really substantive? Is it the case that you have just this intractable situation like you had prior to the Civil War, where, some people supported slavery and some people didn't, and there was really no way to compromise in that issue? Is that the case? I mean, we've got the debates over, woke policies in our country and how the right feels about the left field. What do we do about racism? How do we address a variety of different issues? But my opinion is that there's a second thing, and that is you can have deep differences, or you can have a situation where people have they're beginning to forget how to get along with people they disagree with. And I think that second problem doesn't get as much attention as it should. We've built a society that increasingly doesn't want to interact with people who disagree with them. We've become more isolated for a variety of different reasons. And there are a number of different policies, a number of different cultural trends, certainly social media that enables us to sort of create our own little world. You got 1,000 different choices. I mean, I'll just make two quick points on this. One, there was a time when there were 3 TV stations. Okay. So everybody watched Walter Cronkite. And you can like Walter Cronkite, not like Walter Cronkite, but we were all in that same world. Everybody watched the final episode of MASH. Okay. There were things that brought us together. Now, everybody has the freedom to be in 1,000 different places. There is no really sort of common experience, or there aren't as many common experiences as there used to be. We've become more and more divided and less able to sort of understand people who disagree with us. And the other trend that has started to happen, it tends to be called harm reduction. So when you're growing up and you have, if you're a young person, you're trying to figure out how to interact in the world, you will occasionally come across somebody who disagrees with you or says something that you disagree with. All right. And look, that is an upsetting experience. I remember I developed beliefs and thoughts and everything, 18, 19 years old. And all of a sudden I run into someone who says totally different thing. And I'm like, what the heck? And what we've started to do is say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to try to make sure that you don't have to experience that. And it's gotten to the point where certainly people cannot be subject to harassment. But I've heard young people protest, in school, in jobs. This person, took a position on this issue that I didn't like, and it upset me. So therefore, we have to make sure that that person doesn't say that.
Right.
But we're not teaching people how to be resilient, how to be able to say, yes, it's okay. We'll figure. And so we've divided further and further and further. We don't know how to disagree in a productive way. And we keep pushing ideas and policies that make that more difficult instead of less.
Well, it's sort of it's cancel culture. I
Yeah.
mean, because it's easy to do now, because you never have to really face anyone. You've
Right.
got social media, you've got all these different platforms.
Yeah.
Because in our day, right? I mean, you get punched in the face if you just really took off on someone like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different ways to do it. And look, I think, like I said, it's reasonable to try to protect people from things that are harmful to them. It's not reasonable to imagine a world where you never have to encounter that. And I will say that a lot of the people who are pushing, as you call it, cancel culture, whatever you want to call it, are genuinely trying to figure out how can we better protect people. I think they're misguided.
Mhm.
All right. It's genuine. But there's also people out there who are pushing this because they know one way to win an argument is to silence the opposition.
Right.
I have a story. So when I was in college at Fordham University, I took a class on Edmund Burke with a very conservative professor. And at one point in our class, he said that the biggest mistake our country ever made is when we allowed people to debate abortion. And to my young 21-year-old liberal mind, I was like, you're saying that allowing a debate is no, that's what America's about. We debate. Right. But in a certain sense, he was right, because at the time, his side was winning. The pro-life side was winning. And if you don't allow people to contemplate an alternative, that's one way to win. I think it is a way that creates an authoritarian, dangerous society. But people are also pushing cancel culture as a way to silence opposition to get what they want. And we need to push back against that.
So I know how you feel about Donald Trump. Do you think that most Americans view him as a threat to democracy, or they even think about that?
I'm worried about it. I think a lot of Americans do, and I think he is, but I am deeply worried that too many aren't really paying close attention. And there's a risk here. I mean, look, his campaign is running on a very simple message. Elect me so I can take vengeance on my enemies. Yeah. That's his message. Okay. Yeah, and he's not shy about it. And I hope we wake up to that threat. The whole lot of other issues going on. Look, I can understand why if you're a conservative person, you're upset about the direction of left-wing activism in a lot of different places. That's fine. Donald Trump is an authoritarian, and he is running to be a dictator. And I hope we recognize that threat.
I just think people are, I don't know, maybe it's that we hear it so much that we become desensitized to this whole
that's part of it.
That's what gets me the most.
Well, for us too, we live in Washington State, right? So you're fairly kind of isolated from some of that stuff. So we just can interpret it the way we should be interpreting it, but there's nobody to push back on us, really.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of that as well. You brought up abortion, and I want to ask you about in the recent election. Democrats didn't do that badly. And there's a lot of take that maybe abortion was an issue that helped them because of the, like we see in what's happening in Texas, and the woman that needed to get an abortion because of the physical threat to her. And then Texas government really doing everything possible to not let that happen. She has to go out of state somewhere. I'm curious, do you think abortion is going to be one of the bigger issues that might help Democrats in the next election? Obviously there's concern about Joe Biden's age, all these other things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, both of those issues, both, abortion and the issue of democracy clearly helped us in 22 and 20, and I think they will help us in 24. There's just, I think that will help us because Americans are concerned about the extreme position that Republicans have taken on abortion that is denying women's access to reproductive health care and basic health care. I mean, if you have a miscarriage, you have doctors who are afraid to perform the basic procedure that needs to be performed at that place because they are potentially in violation of the law in some states. I think that will be an enormous issue in this campaign. Now, I'm worried about the campaign for the reasons that you alluded to. People are concerned about Biden's age. They're critical of some of his policies. They're looking for change. And in a Biden-Trump race, I think we kind of have to win that one. And it's going to be tough looking at the polls right now for a variety of different reasons. But certainly abortion will be one issue that will help Democrats turn out the vote and hopefully, succeed in keeping Donald Trump from getting back into the White House.
Do you see there any possibility that Biden might pull out of the campaign or let Kamala run or whatever?
It's highly unlikely. I wouldn't say that it's zero at this point. But I know the Biden team fairly well, and they are convinced that he is the best person to take on Donald Trump in 24, largely because he was successful at doing it in 2020. And, the better the devil you know argument. We know Biden beat Trump. We don't know what would come next if he didn't run. But yes, I am worried about it. I don't think Joe Biden's too old to be president. I've seen him do his job. I think he's doing it well, but the majority of Americans disagree with me on that point. And how does that impact his ability to win?
Let's talk about your book, Lost and Broken, My Journey Back from Chronic Pain and Crippling Anxiety. This is a book really about, the health issues that you have been dealing with for a long time.
Yeah, there's kind of three phases to it. The first phase was from the time I was a teenager for quite a while, where I had a variety of different challenges physically. I had a knee surgery, which I didn't rehab from, which meant I had a bad knee and then a bad back and a bad foot. And I was always sort of kind of dealing with it. At the same time, I was always mentally kind of a high stress person. I had one bout of depression when I was 25. I had no idea what it was. Just for like 4 or 5 months, I had this incredibly bleak out, just this feeling of existential dread that was unrelated to the circumstances in my life at that time. But for the most part, during that first phase, it was all manageable. I could work around it. Maybe my knee would hurt for a while, but I still could work out and I could still get through it. And then the second phase sort of started in 2005 when I had uncontrollable anxiety for about 5 months that I never really dealt with. I saw a psychiatrist. I took some anti-anxiety meds and then it went away. And then in 2013, it came back and my pain came back a year after that, or my pain got uncontrollable. So the second phase is when I literally was day to day just struggling, massively struggling with anxiety, with pain. I went through 3 hip surgeries. And then the third stage was sort of figuring out how to get out of that. And I outline all 3 of those in my book. It's not like overnight I suddenly had mental health issues or overnight I had pain issues, but pretty close to overnight, they became incapacitating, just really made it difficult to get through it. And the main reason I wrote the book is I think a lot of people are going through similar things. Anxiety, depression, chronic pain, some combination of that. And I wanted to sort of show my journey as potentially, a guidepost to help others and really drive home the point that help does exist. There are ways to better deal with anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. I went through a whole lot of false starts. As I chronicle in the book, I saw well over 100 different providers, from 2013, when I first went to see a psychologist, to finally when I found a psychologist and a muscle activation person who could help me, physical therapists, podiatrists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, you name it, most of whom didn't help me at all until I finally found the people who did.
I suffered from depression. Actually, I guess I can say I still suffer from depression because I think it's kind of an ongoing thing. You kind of have to find the treatment to help you and things. And I can relate to how you trying to find, well, for one thing, realizing you got a problem, and then number two, trying to find someone to help you. And it just does not happen overnight. It's a long journey and it's very hard to deal with. At any point, did you ever feel like, oh, I got to check out?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that.
Take your life, or that give up?
Because I'm afraid of death. So suicide wasn't a viable option.
I'm with you there. Yeah.
Yeah. There were many, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of that.
No.
I know a lot of people who do get to the point where they can't take it anymore and they choose death as a preferable option to life. No, I never got to that point. Every day I doubted that I used to say, I'm not going to make it. And people would ask me, well, what do you mean by that? I don't really know what I mean by that. I just mean maybe there'll come a day when I simply can't get out of bed. Which is what I outlined. But I think when it comes to mental health, it's important to sort of divide it. First of all, we don't do enough on sort of basic mental health maintenance. I mean, from the time you're a kid, you have child visits. You have to get a physical to start school or play a sport. There's not really a sense of your basic mental health. And basic mental health, before you cross over the line, even to anxiety and depression, is how do you process the emotions and the events that come through to you? And it's not an easy thing to do. Things will hit you. You don't know how to handle it. So this is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is teaching you how to process the stresses and strains and ups and downs of life. And we can all benefit from that. And I went through a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, but anxiety and depression is a different thing. And that's what depression isn't, I'm having a bad week, I feel down. Depression is this feeling that comes into you where you're constantly feeling like there is no point, like you have no interest in anything. And it's not necessarily related to anything that's going on in your life. Anxiety goes the other way. You can't ever calm down. And that's where you got to get into some of the deeper issues. And psychotherapy helped me enormously to get at some of the stuff that I wasn't honestly addressing. And then there are also some baseline self-worth issues that I had to deal with. And that's what took me so long to find a psychologist who could explain that to me and treat me for it. I did, and I'm incredibly grateful. I did 3.5 years worth of psychotherapy to sort through all of those issues. But I think we need to think more about our mental health. Because mostly it's like, no, I'm fine. And you really do need to work at making sure that you're processing the issues in your life and dealing with those stresses and strains and ups and downs in a way that is healthy.
Yeah, I think that there's one of the challenges we deal with is still the stigma issue. And when it hit me the hardest, it was, you're going back to, I was like, 34 years old. So this is the mid 80s. And I still think there's that thing about you don't show any, that you got an issue and I mean, I remember being just afraid to tell anybody because I worked in television. And then, you're working in a career where your face is seen by people and you're dealing with that way. And it's just so hard. You're dealing in politics. You got to go out and talk to constituents.
Same thing.
That's got to be hell. I mean, it had to be really hell. How did you get through that?
Yeah, well, mostly I got through it by just putting my head down and going through it. And also I had a lot of help, certainly my family, my staff, my friends. I kept going and kept doing the job, even in the face of that. But I think you said something really important about the stigma around mental health. I think there's a general feeling that if you tell people you have a mental health issue, they will look down upon you and they will think differently about you. That's one big aspect of the stigma. I think another aspect of the stigma is the idea that I certainly had when it first hit me was, there's no point in telling anybody because what am I going to do about this? Yeah. You know, if I pull a muscle, okay, I can go to a PT and I can work through all this other stuff. I found out I was a little wrong about that too. But anyway, there's this notion that you can get better from physical injuries, but mental, it's like, how do I change the way I feel? Okay, it's how I feel. You know, and the truth is you can change the way you feel. There are therapies to do that, but that's not widely understood. And one of my biggest problems when this first hit me, my way of viewing mental illness, as I've described it up to that point, was there's a line. Either you're normal or you're crazy. I was normal and I was going to stay that way. Okay. I'm not going over into crazy because there's no coming back from crazy, which is just stupid to put it bluntly about how the mind works and how you do things. But that was my understanding of it. So then I had to sort of go blindly searching in the world for people who could better educate me about how the mind works. But the truth is, you can exercise your mind in the same way you exercise your body. You can teach your mind to better deal with trauma and with issues you've dealt with in the same way that you can train your body to lift more weight and have greater cardiovascular health.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to remember, there are a lot of people right in the middle there that are dealing with all that as well. Go ahead, Matt.
So how are you dealing with your chronic pain at this point? I mean, you know, I'm undergoing cancer treatment. Been doing it for a while, and sometimes the therapies are as brutal as the cancer. And,
absolutely.
You know, so I understand chronic pain at this point. How are you dealing with it? I mean, how are you able to kind of mitigate it for yourself?
Yeah, I don't have chronic pain anymore. Okay. And I don't have chronic pain because of the folks at the they call themselves muscle activation techniques. They do muscle activation therapy, but they do a very specific type of muscle activation therapy. And there's a gentleman in Bellevue who literally saved my life, who works out of a shop there with, I think he's got 5 or 6 other muscle activation techniques people. It's a school that started in Denver that's got a very specific way of making sure that your muscles are functioning properly. And I started seeing him April 1st, 2018. Probably took about a year to get me back moving in the right direction, probably another year after that to get back to normal. But once my muscles got activated again, and I have a long speech about how this thing works, which I'll spare you for the moment, but it works in a way that physical therapy doesn't. And they've really done a deep dive. And the people who run this, they work with professional athletes. The guy who started it, Greg Roscoff out of Denver, actually, and Seattle fans will not appreciate this, but Greg is responsible for Christian McCaffrey finally being able to be healthy enough to stay on the field. Wow. He works with the San Francisco 49ers because he's got a connection with John Lynch, who's the GM. And he works with a lot of athletes. And my guy works with a lot of baseball players, few football players as well. But it is a way of making your muscles work that reduce the pain. So I don't have chronic pain. I mean, every once in a while I'll tweak something. I go see him, we get it straightened out. It's all good. So yeah, that basically is what solved the pain problem.
You know, we're fortunate in that in going through this, that you have access to healthcare.
Yeah.
But what about all those folks that are, and we see them on the streets of Seattle and other cities around the country that are they can't get help, or maybe they can, but they can't because of whatever is going on with them. Yeah, we have a huge problem here.
Yeah, there are multiple layers to that, and it is an oversimplification to say, if we just gave everyone access to healthcare, everything would be fine. That misses a whole lot of very important challenges, but it has one fundamental truth to it. In the United States, we have too many people that don't have access to basic healthcare, and that makes it more difficult. We have a very complicated system. I had health insurance. Now, not the muscle activation people I just mentioned, not covered by insurance. So, part of it is having the resources to pay for those sorts of things. I don't have an endless amount of money. I'm a public servant, but I had enough to pay this guy and be able to see those services. So we need more access. The other thing we need is to make sure that we do best practices, because even as we sit here and say that in the United States of America, too many people don't have access to healthcare, the U.S. spends more money on healthcare per capita than any other country in the world. And it's not even close. All right. We're spending a ton of money, but what are we spending it on? Too many times we're spending it on treatments and therapies that don't actually help people. And we need to get to better practices. And that's the frustration. I could go see physical therapists all day long and my insurance would cover it. And I did. They didn't help me. Okay. What they were doing didn't help me at all. The guy that did help me was outside of the system. So we need to look more at what is truly going to help people. Where are we spending our money? How can we redirect that money to make sure that more people have access to basic health care?
Since you wrote the book and it's been out, have you heard from any of your fellow Congress men and women about what you wrote and the decision to write it? Or has anybody come up to you and said, "Hey, I got a problem"?
Many people, many times. That's one of the things that is really validated for me in writing this book, that it was the right thing to do. And I guess I'll just one example, not giving out the name, but someone came up to me on the floor, I don't know, a few months back and said, "Thank you. Thank you for writing that book." And the way he put it is, "You gave me permission to seek help." I hadn't wanted to and thought about it, but I read that book and it was like, yes, people are talking about it. And he said he's had the best couple of weeks of his life because he finally went and, sought help for, I think it was an anxiety problem that he was having. So yeah, I've gotten a lot of that, certainly from my colleagues and also from just people I know in various, walks of life. So I hope that has been the impact for a lot of people.
Can I ask you if that guy was an R or a D?
Yeah, no, I don't want to get into it any more than that. But I can tell you, in fact, on the R side, I went on Matt Gates's podcast to talk about this.
Oh,
Matt,
really?
Yeah, we had a great interview and a great conversation about it. He's on the Armed Services Committee. So
right.
I've worked with him on a number of different things. And so, yeah, it has been, I will say this, the general positive reaction has been bipartisan.
Good. That's good. That's good. That's actually progress.
Well, speaking of bipartisan, moving forward into this next year, is anything substantive going to get accomplished?
Yeah. Hey, we passed the defense bill today.
That's true. That's true.
So, I mean, a little bit of something. No, I think it's going to be hard. I think a lot of people sort of focus on, what Congress is doing. And, government functions, whether we're passing legislation or not. We actually had the most productive session of Congress in probably about 40 years. Last session, when we passed the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the recovery plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the appropriations bills and the defense bill. We passed a lot of substantive legislation in those 2 years. And a lot of what we're doing now is implementing it. The big concern is we need a supplemental funding package to help Ukraine. Ukraine's holding on. They retook a lot of territory. They've blocked the Russians, but the Russians still want to take Kyiv. They still want to eliminate Ukraine as a country. I think if we continue to support Ukraine, they will be able to hold on and eventually force the Russians to the peace table. But right now, Republicans, as we discussed earlier, moving away from that. Huge problem. And Putin is celebrating it every day. And then the second thing is the appropriations bills. We have not yet passed appropriations bills for fiscal year 24. We've got a continuing resolution that takes us to mid-January, but continuing resolutions are a horrible way to fund the government. They undermine the ability, DOD in particular, Department of Defense, and other things. So we're going to try to pass appropriations bills. We're going to try to get that supplemental done. They're talking about trying to do some border security. But other than that, I think it's not going to be a terribly productive year next year in terms of passing legislation.
Yeah. One more thing about the book and the whole issue about mental illness. You talked at all with Senator John Fetterman, who
I have.
He's from Pennsylvania. He had a bout of depression.
I went over and met with him. We had a good conversation. And look, he's on the stigma point. We've actually gotten a little better in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of reducing the stigma because people like John Fetterman have been open in public about their own battles with depression, anxiety, and mental illness. And you've seen a number of high-profile, athletes and celebrities and others talking openly about it in a way that has helped reduce the stigma. It's still there. It's still a challenge and still part of the problem. And the other thing that I always emphasize when I'm talking about this is it's great that we're talking about it. I want us to talk about it in a positive way, which is help exists, you can get better. I think too often a lot of the focus on mental health issues, certainly on substance abuse, becomes sort of voyeuristic, like, oh my gosh, look at how messed up that person is. Amazing. Wow.
Right.
Isn't that terrible? No. What we want to try to do is, if you talk about it, if you're open about it, there is a path to better understand your mind so that you can actually get better and better handle the emotions and feelings that you have to reduce that mental illness. And I want to get that message out there as strongly as possible as well.
It seems like a lot of younger people, younger generations recognize this a lot more. I mean, I think our generation, mental illness, drug addiction is like a moral failing, a character flaw rather than an illness.
And it was like, get over it, Yeah, that was the mentality I think we often dealt with.
We were raised not to address it. Now, I will say with the younger people, and that's why I make the other point is just talking about it isn't the point. What can we do to help increase your ability to deal with it, build resilience? And I do worry sometimes that it just, talk about your problems. That's great. That's part of it. But the goal is to help solve those problems and make you better, not to just wallow in it and talk about it forever. And that's a tough point because people will, oh, you're accusing these people, they're victims. I get that, but you have to help people. Throughout my life, I've needed people to push me from time to time. And I think we all need that. So talk about it. Great. Do something about it, even better.
The book is called Lost and Broken, My Journey Back from Chronic Pain and Crippling Anxiety. And it was written by Washington's 9th Congressional District Congressman Adam Smith. And thanks so much for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Enjoy the holidays and let's gird ourselves for what's definitely going to be an interesting year.
It's going to be a fun 2022.
Fun is fun. I don't know if that's the right word.
Interesting.
Yeah, fun might not challenging.
Yeah. All right, Congressman. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Enrique. Great to see you. Nice to meet you as well.
All
right. Thanks.
The Chino Y Chicano podcast is available on your favorite podcast provider.
You can watch the video version on YouTube, and Converge Media, a leading producer of culturally relevant content in the Pacific Northwest. We'll talk more later.